4.6, we're going to focus more on isosceles and equilateral triangles. All right. Just a reminder, isosceles triangles have at least two congruent sides, okay? The two sides that are congruent are called the legs, okay? And the third side that is not congruent to either of the other two, that's called the base, all right? The angle that is created by the legs is called the vertex angle. And the angles that are on the base are called the base angles. Okay. Those vocab words are going to be pretty important. Okay. The isosceles triangle theorem, which you will see abbreviated as ITT, says that if two sides of a triangle are congruent, then the angles opposite those sides are congruent, okay? So here, AC congruent to BC, so angle 1 and angle 2 are congruent, okay? Or a little bit better way to describe it, since isosceles triangles have two congruent sides, we say that the base angles of an isosceles triangle are congruent, okay? The converse of that, if we know that two angles are congruent in a triangle, then those opposite sides are congruent as well, okay? So the theorem says that we need the sides to be congruent first. Then we can say that the angles are congruent, okay? The converse says, hey, we've got two congruent angles. Now we can say that the sides are congruent. Okay? Excuse me. The examples there. We want to identify two unmarked congruent segments, okay? So I see that angle G, this angle G, and this angle J are congruent. So I'm going to go opposite those, looking at this triangle GJH, okay? So I know that GH then is congruent to JH. All right. Identify two unmarked congruent angles. Well, I'm going to look at triangle FGJ here, and I see that FG and FJ are congruent. So those angles opposite those sides, okay, are these base angles. Angle FGJ and angle FJG are congruent, okay? Now, equilateral triangles. Again, they have three congruent sides, okay? And a triangle is only equilateral if it's also equiangular, okay? So if you know that a triangle is equilateral, you also know it's equiangular. You know a triangle is equiangular, you know it's an equilateral, okay? And since the sum of all angles of a triangle is 180 degrees, an equilateral triangle is also equiangular. If we divide that by 3, we get that each angle of an equilateral triangle is 60 degrees. Okay? So some examples that you could run into. Here I know that this is 60 degrees. Okay? I know that these are congruent. If I know that these two sides are congruent, I also know that these two angles are congruent. Okay? So 180 minus 60 is 120. Divided by 2 is 60 degrees. So the measure of angle Y is 60 degrees as well. That makes this an equiangular triangle, which is also equilateral. So then ZY is going to be 8 inches as well. Okay. Second example, in the figure to the right, find the measure of angle M. Okay, well, angle N here is 120 degrees. So if I take that away from 180, that gives me 60 degrees to split between these two angles, okay, because they are congruent. 60 divided by 2 is 30, so the measure of angle M is 30 degrees, okay? You know that those two angles are congruent, so these two sides are congruent, and so if MN is 11 centimeters, PN is also 11 centimeters, okay? And last but not least, find the value of each missing variable, okay? So I'm looking here, I've got these two congruent sides. These are my legs of the isosceles triangle, so these base angles are congruent. Okay. If all three of these angles are congruent, that means all three of my sides are congruent as well. Okay, so I can take any one of these, since we know that it is now equiangular, and set 2x equal to 60 to find x to be 30. Okay, I can also set 4y minus 5 equal to 3, because any triangle that is equiangular is also equilateral. Okay, if I add 5 and divide by 4, my y value is 2. Okay, and lastly, example B. Here, I'm going to start by solving for y. I can set 4y minus 2 equal to 2y plus 2. Okay, because this is an isosceles triangle, those two sides are congruent. Add 2 to both sides, take 2y away. I get 2y to be 4. That means my y value is 2. Okay. Now, if this is an isosceles triangle, the base angles are congruent. So this angle down here on the bottom left is also 6x plus 8. Okay, now I know the sum of all three angles is 180, so I'm going to say 6x plus 8 plus 6x plus 8 plus 80 equals 180. Okay, simplify this left side. 12x plus 96 equals 180. Okay, take 96 away. 12x is going to be 84. And if I divide both sides by 12, my x value is 7.